The kidnapping that haunted Spain, the chilling case of Anabel Segura. The tape that froze a nation. Spain, 1995. Millions of people sat silently in their living rooms, staring at their television screens. It was late at night during a popular missing person program. The host leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but tense. In a moment, the audience would hear something that had haunted investigators for 2 years. The tape. A recording sent by kidnappers. A voice that claimed to belong to a young woman named Anabel Segura, a young university student who had vanished without a trace. The host warned viewers, "Listen carefully. Someone out there may recognize the voices." Then the tape began to play. First, a soft female voice. Nervous, trying to sound calm. She spoke slowly to her parents. And then another voice followed. A man. Cold, slow, measured, delivering a terrifying message. A ransom demand, the threat. And that recording would become one of the most disturbing pieces of evidence in modern Spanish criminal history. Because by the time that tape reached the television studio, a horrifying truth had already unfolded. One that nobody watching the broadcast yet knew. This is the story of Anabel Segura. A crime that shocked Spain. A mystery that lasted 2 years. And a tape recording that would eventually expose the people behind it all. Act 1. The morning that everything changed. April 12, 1993. It was a calm spring morning in La Moraleja, one of the wealthiest residential areas near Madrid. Tree-lined streets stretched between large houses and quiet roads. Families here lived comfortable lives, far removed from the violence often seen in big cities. Crime was rare. Danger felt distant. That morning, 22-year-old Anabel Segura stepped outside her home. She was a university student studying business administration. Friends described her as cheerful, energetic, and disciplined. Jogging had become part of her routine. Almost every morning, she ran through the quiet streets of the neighborhood. It was safe, or at least everyone believed it was. Around 8:30 a.m., Anabel left her house wearing a jogging outfit. She told her family she would be back shortly. It was just another normal morning. But somewhere nearby, 2 men were waiting, inside a white van. Watching, waiting for the perfect moment. No one knows exactly what they said to her. Some investigators believe they tried to ask for directions. Others believe they tried to force her immediately into the vehicle. But neighbors later reported hearing something strange. A sudden shout, a brief struggle, then silence. By the time anyone realized something was wrong, the van was already gone, and Anabel Segura had vanished. Act 2, the search begins. When Anabel didn't return home, her family became worried. At first, they assumed something simple had happened. Maybe she stopped to talk to a friend. Maybe she extended her run. But hours passed. Then the afternoon. Then the evening. By nightfall, the Segura family contacted police. Officers began searching the jogging route. They found no signs of a struggle. No clothing. No witnesses who clearly saw what happened. But several residents reported something important. A white delivery van had been seen driving slowly through the area. That detail immediately raised alarm bells for investigators. Because La Moraleja was not the kind of place where random vans drove around looking for trouble. Within hours, police began treating the disappearance as a possible kidnapping. News spread quickly, and soon the entire country was watching. Spain had seen kidnappings before, often linked to political groups or organized crime. But this case felt different. Anabel was not a politician. She wasn't famous. She was simply a young woman out for a morning run. And now she was gone. Act 3, the first contact. Days passed with no answers. Search teams combed forests, fields, and nearby roads. Helicopters scanned the countryside. Police interviewed hundreds of people. But there was still no sign of Anabel. The phone rang. The call came to the Segura family. A man's voice spoke slowly, carefully. He said they had their daughter, and if they wanted to see her alive again, they would have to pay. The ransom demand was enormous. 150 million pesetas, nearly 1 million euros in today's value. The kidnappers warned the family not to involve police. But the authorities were already deeply involved. Investigators began preparing for what they hoped would be a controlled ransom exchange. But the kidnappers were cautious, paranoid, and unpredictable. Soon after the call, a package arrived. Inside was a cassette tape. The kidnappers claimed it would prove Anabel was alive. The voice sounded frightened but controlled. She told her parents she was being treated well. She asked them to cooperate, to follow the kidnappers' instructions. Then the tape continued. Another voice entered. His tone was calm, deliberate, almost mechanical. He spoke slowly, making sure every word was understood. If the money was not delivered, Anabel would die. Act for a deadly game. Police immediately began analyzing the recording. Every detail mattered. The tone of the voices, background noise, accent, speech patterns. Investigators even examined the tape for environmental sounds that could reveal where it was recorded. But the kidnappers stayed ahead. Every attempt to arrange the ransom exchange became complicated. Instructions changed constantly. Locations shifted. Meeting points were altered at the last minute. Investigators believed the criminals were deliberately trying to avoid police surveillance. Weeks passed. The kidnappers continued sending instructions. But the ransom delivery never happened. Suddenly, the calls stopped. The letters stopped. The tapes stopped. The kidnappers vanished. And with them, any trace of Anabel Segura. Act 5, 2 years of silence. For the next 2 years, investigators refused to close the case. Spain followed every development. Posters with Anabel's photo appeared everywhere. Police chased hundreds of leads. But nothing concrete emerged. Some believed she might still be alive somewhere. Others feared the worst. Then in 1995, a television program decided to try something different. They would broadcast the tape to the entire country, hoping someone somewhere would recognize the voices. What happened next would finally break the case wide open. But the truth investigators were about to uncover was darker than anyone imagined. The kidnapping that haunted Spain, the chilling case of Anabel Segura. Act 6, the broadcast that changed everything. It was late at night in 1995. 2 years had passed since Anabel Segura disappeared. 2 years of uncertainty. 2 years of searching. And 2 years of a family desperately hoping for answers. Across Spain, millions of people were familiar with Anabel's face. Her disappearance had become one of the most talked about cases in the country. Her photograph appeared everywhere. Newspapers, television reports, missing person posters. But despite the massive investigation, there had been no real breakthrough. Until one television program decided to try something different. During a late-night broadcast dedicated to unsolved disappearances, the host turned to the camera with a serious expression. Investigators had provided them with something important. A recording that had been sent by the kidnappers during the ransom negotiations. The idea was simple. If the voices were broadcast across the country, someone might recognize them. Someone might know who they belonged to. So that night, millions of viewers listened carefully as the chilling recording was discussed on national television. Most people simply heard a disturbing message from criminals. But for one viewer watching the broadcast, something felt strangely familiar. Act 7, the call that changed the case. Shortly after the program aired, the police received an unexpected phone call. A woman had been watching the show. When she heard the recording discussed during the broadcast, she immediately recognized something. Not the voice of the man, but the female voice. The voice that the kidnappers had claimed belonged to Anabel. The caller told investigators something shocking. She believed the voice actually belonged to a woman she knew personally. A woman named Maria Angeles Molina. If the caller was correct, it meant something deeply disturbing. The voice in the recording was not Anabel at all. Police began quietly investigating the woman mentioned in the tip. They compared speech patterns. They analyzed connections between people in her life. And soon, investigators discovered something important. Maria Angeles Molina had a boyfriend, a man named Antonio Garcia. And Antonio Garcia had a close associate named Jose Luis Martinez. The deeper investigators looked, the more suspicious the connections became. Both men had troubled backgrounds. Both were struggling financially, and both had access to vehicles similar to the one seen near Anabel's neighborhood the morning she disappeared. For investigators who had been searching for answers for 2 years, this was the first real breakthrough. Police began carefully monitoring the suspects. They watched their movements. They gathered evidence. And once they were confident they had enough, they moved in. In 1995, officers arrested the suspects. And during interrogation, the horrifying truth finally began to emerge. Act 8. The confession. At first, the suspects denied everything. But as investigators presented the evidence, their story began to unravel. Eventually, one of them broke. And what he revealed shocked the entire nation. According to their confession, the kidnapping had never gone according to plan. On the morning of April 12, 1993, the men had been driving around the wealthy neighborhood of La Moraleja looking for a potential victim. Their goal was simple: kidnap someone from a wealthy family and demand ransom money. When they saw Anabel jogging alone on the quiet street, they decided she would be their target. They forced her into the van. But during the kidnapping, something went terribly wrong. As they tried to restrain her, Anabel struggled. In the chaos, she suffocated. By the time the kidnappers realized what had happened, she was already dead. Panicked and terrified of being caught, they buried her body in a remote rural area in Toledo province. But instead of reporting what had happened, instead of abandoning their plan, they continued the ransom scheme. They contacted the family. They demanded money. And to convince the Segura family that Anabel was still alive, they asked Maria Angeles Molina to record a message pretending to be the missing student. It was a cruel and calculated deception, one that gave the family false hope for weeks, even though Anabel had already lost her life. Act 9. Finding Anabel. After the confession, police demanded the suspects reveal where they had buried the body. The criminals eventually agreed to lead investigators to the location. It was a remote area in the countryside, quite isolated, far away from the streets where Anabel had gone jogging that spring morning. Investigators began digging. For hours they searched the ground. Then they found what they feared: the remains of Anabel Segura. More than 2 years after she disappeared. For her family, the discovery brought both devastation and closure. The uncertainty was finally over. But the truth was almost unbearable. Their daughter had never survived the kidnapping, and the hope they held for weeks had been built on a lie. Justice. The criminals were eventually tried and convicted. They received long prison sentences for kidnapping, extortion, and murder. The case became one of the most infamous crimes in modern Spanish history, not just because of the kidnapping itself, but because of the disturbing deception that followed. A fake message, a false voice, and criminals who continued demanding money even after their victim had died. The story shocked the entire country, and it served as a reminder of how cruel and calculated crime can sometimes be. More than 3 decades later, the story of Anabel Segura is still remembered in Spain, not only as a tragic crime, but as a case that changed how kidnapping investigations were handled. It also reminded the country that even the safest neighborhoods can hide unexpected dangers. But above all, it ensured that Anabel Segura would never be forgotten. A young woman whose life was taken far too soon, and whose story continues to be told so the truth is never lost. Stories like this remind us that behind every headline, there are real lives, real families, and real tragedies that deserve to be remembered. If you want to hear more true crime stories like this one from around the world, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story. Because sometimes, the most chilling mysteries are the ones that actually happened.